Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. We got a lot going on here as we are tracking the latest developments with Russia-Ukraine tensions. President Vladimir Putin announcing that Russia would recognize the independence of two territories in Ukraine controlled by Moscow-backed separatists, putting Europe further along the path to what many fear could be one of the biggest conflicts in Europe since World War II. I want to bring in Hal Kempfer, CEO of Global Risk Intelligence and Planning. Also, just honestly an expert when it comes to this topic. Hal, you've joined us quite a bit here on the show. Thanks for joining us again.
No, thank you, Daytona.
Okay, so let's get right into it. How important is this decision by Putin today, and could it escalate things in the coming days when it comes to tensions?
Basically, what he announced was enormous, with huge implications. It changes everything. It clarifies. He's going back to a classic Russian imperial Soviet era view of where Russia's position is in the region and in the world. When he says Ukraine is not a real nation, pointing back to say it was something that communist Soviet Union had created, he's basically washing over, hundreds of years of history. But more importantly, he has basically set down a marker saying that the elimination of Ukraine as an independent sovereign state is his end state or his goal. What's very concerning for NATO and the United States is that Russian line of thinking also looks at the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, in the same way. Traditional Russian thinking is that they should be part of Mother Russia. Now that's another step because those countries are NATO countries. So there are tremendous ramifications across the board on what he just said today. Also with naming that Donbas region, those two provinces, saying that I am now recognizing them, following up on the Duma vote last week, that I am recognizing them as independent countries. That opens up those countries inviting not just Russian weapons, and de facto, there already are Russian troops on the ground in those regions. They may not be declared, but they are there as sort of advanced parties and doing other things. But it's going to give him the legal excuse in his mind to allow those countries or those new republics, as he calls them, the little statelets, to invite Russia to move in. Russia could literally invade eastern Ukraine unopposed, moving through those areas up to what we sometimes refer to as the forward line of troops or the forward edge of the battle area where they run up against Ukraine forces. Then you run into a real question, which is, will he then, in cooperation with these, quote, republics, then say we need to liberate the rest of these republics' land that has been held by Ukraine aggression? And at that point, potentially you could have an all-out battle, armed conflict between Ukraine forces and Russian forces, or Ukraine could decide to simply pull back their forces outside these two provinces, and the political implications of that are enormous as well.
So we're hearing just coming in right now as well, there's been immediate reaction by the EU, by NATO, the NATO chief condemning this decision, and now the EU saying it's going to impose sanctions on Russia. What are next steps?
This is, fortunately we're putting in sanctions before he sends troops in, but he's already announced his intent. There's just no way that he can go back from what he's done. Even beyond the international side, from a domestic political audience to the Russian people, it would be very difficult for him to back down from what he's just said. And that long, some would say rambling historical dialogue or historical speech that he just gave, where he kind of repositions what Ukraine is and the history of the region and everything else. He's put this in very, very stark terms, which almost compels him to order military action on the ground. Now, we're going to let him know, we being the West, which will be the European Union, it'll be Western nations around the world for that matter, we're going to let him know what these sanctions will look like. And they're going to be fairly draconian. I could see Russia becoming a somewhat pariah system in the international financial order, the international trade world, kind of like what North Korea or Iran is today. In fact, I think they could be in a worse shape than where Iran is today, with all things being said. This is going to be incredibly disruptive. We're going to see huge price shocks in natural gas. We're going to see huge price shocks in oil. And then something that a lot of people don't bake in is there are certain things that Russia really controls of the world market, like nickel. And nickel is essential for making batteries. That's part of a whole renewable energy future, or renewable energy supply chain. And nickel will be disrupted. So there's going to be a lot of these little things that we don't recognize that are going to have ripples across our economy, across our society. This is incredibly disruptive.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hal, but an official sanctions package hasn't fully been disclosed yet to the public, right?
No, it's coming. We've been holding back. We didn't want to show our cards. Now, honestly, when you work at this level, look, Putin's an intelligence officer, and he was a pretty good one, all right? And the Russian intelligence service is one of the best intelligence services in the world. So I think they've pretty much figured out what the sanctions are. Not that we're holding those cards completely to our chest. I mean, we're giving enough indicators that they can piece together kind of what's going to happen, and they can certainly war game, if you will, what's going to happen, and they know that. But this just kind of shows the desperation that Putin is in politically, that he would go with this gambit. This thing has a lot of ramifications, potentially. And it's interesting, I did an analysis on this yesterday, looking at will to fight. The Ukraine forces appear to have a pretty strong will to fight, which is not what they had back in 2014. The Ukraine forces, Ukraine is much more national pride, much more nationalism across Ukraine, something that is much stronger than what they had 8 years ago. And they have Javelin missiles and other systems, defensive missile systems, that they didn't have before. So there is a distinct possibility that Russia could go in there and suffer significant battlefield casualties, significant losses on the battlefield. This could truly become a horrific war of attrition for both sides. But for Russia, this could pose a big problem. I'm not sure how committed Russian troops are at the troop level. When you start seeing a third of your tank company go up in flames because of missiles, and you can't figure out where the missiles are coming from exactly, and you're a young conscript that's been abused, and you're not sure why you're there, why you're fighting, these what he has now said are like brother Russians or something. You're not quite sure what's going on there. That can really slow down your offensive operations and increase the amount of casualties and attrition they face. According to reports, and I personally haven't done the math on this looking at satellite photos, according to reports, most of the operational ground combat unions in the Soviet military are arrayed around Ukraine. Significant as those forces are, what to me is more significant is the fact that that's not all they have, but that's most of what they have, by some estimates up to 75%. And as they start suffering casualties and they start suffering losses, they've got to figure out a way to rotate units to bring in additional personnel, which could cause them to hollow out other military forces around Russia. And remember, there are military forces in a couple of provinces in Georgia that they have never pulled back from. There's the ongoing, although much less, conflict in Chechnya. And I have to believe that if they start hollowing out those forces, Georgia and certainly the rebels in Chechnya will see this as an opportunity to maybe reverse their fortunes, if you will, on the battlefield.
Right. Well, I just pulled up video of evacuees from separatist-controlled regions in eastern Ukraine. They're arriving in Russia right now. Could we see more of this in the coming days after this announcement from Putin?
Well, I hate to even call them refugees. This is purely orchestrated by Russia. What they're doing is they're trying to create this illusion that there is Ukraine military aggression, Ukraine attacks. They have claimed that there have been attacks on border checkpoints. They claim that shelling that, among other things, hit a kindergarten. The blowing up of the vehicle, which they claim was a terrorist attack by Ukraine. They're creating this whole illusion. It's this disinformation campaign to make it look like Ukraine is the aggressor. And now they're pulling all these civilians out of these two provinces. What that does twofold. It fits the narrative that they're trying to push, which is there's Ukraine military aggression, and that they're going in there to help these ethnic Russians, these independent republics, from this unvarnished Ukraine military aggression, which is killing civilians and all the stuff that Russia wants the world to believe. Which, frankly, I can't think of any country in the world believes this. To include countries that probably are not that, not necessarily completely non-aligned with Russia. But the other side is this: it's also clearing that zone of action. They're preparing this battle space, if you will, for some high intensity conflict, and so they're getting women and children, civilians. A lot of the men are being sort of pressed into service within those regions as some sort of militia or something else, and they're preparing that zone of action for conflict. So there's a twofold thing. One is an operational thing to clear the area of potential collateral damage, and the other is this whole disinformation propaganda piece that Russia's putting out to justify its actions.
Right, and taking it back here at home, Hal, we just got into the newsroom. President Biden has decided to issue an order banning investment and trade to break away parts of Ukraine after this announcement from Putin. This is just the first step in sanctions, like we were just talking about, from the Biden administration. Could there be more? What could be next, Hal?
There will be more, and one of the ones that everybody's looking at is banning Russia, banning Russian corporations, banning Russian oligarchs in particular from participation in SWIFT, which is the international banking system. And if Russia is taken out of SWIFT, that makes their ability to conduct world trade extremely difficult, bordering on impossible. Now, one of the things that's been happening is this growing relationship with China. And one of the things that China said recently was that they would become Russia's bankers, if you will, if Russia was kicked out of the SWIFT system. That works to some degree. There's really a bit of a challenge there in terms of economic alignment. Russia economically is more aligned with the West and Europe, and not so much aligned with Asia and China. And so, whereas it sounds good on paper, if you will, from a Russia standpoint, they're going to basically replace Europe as our banker, Europe as our trade partner. The mechanics of how that would be done are very different, and it's not a smooth transition. Then there's a question of how long can Russia withstand these sanctions? How long can the economy continue to tank before the Russian population, which has been rather restive in recent years, how long before they start going to the streets? And if they start going to the streets, will the Russian military, will the Russian security apparatus be able to contain whatever happens? It's very interesting that one of the great fears that Putin has that he ends up like Gaddafi in Libya. This little gambit may end up triggering a series of events where that could potentially happen in Moscow. It's not completely outside the sphere of possibility. It's not something I expect to see anytime soon. Mm-hmm. But then again, hey, I remember back in '91, or back in, we got through with Desert Storm, and where we basically showed the great Soviet military machine to be completely vulnerable to our tactics, to our weapon systems, even though they were being manned by Iraqis. And that was enough that it triggered a series of events that I got back in the summer, and by December, the Soviet Union had fallen apart. So, things can happen.
Right. With this action from President Biden, could that tarnish the opportunity for a meeting between President Biden and President Putin that there was talks of it happening? It's not fully confirmed, but could this just completely destroy that even possibility?
I'm not quite sure who was advising President Biden on this, but there's a little term which really doesn't mean that much in English, but it means a lot in Russian. In what President Biden said was, "We are agreeing to a summit in principle," and then he added, "if they don't invade." Okay,
right.
All right. When you in Russia, if you say in principle, it has kind of the same meaning that inshallah has in the Middle East, which is if God wills it. It's another way to politely say probably ain't going to happen.
Got it.
And so when he said that, it was diplomatic speak, but on the other hand, for Russians and certainly for Putin, he knows exactly what that means, which is it's probably not going to happen. And I would say after this speech that he just gave, it's almost assured that it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, we do know that he had a phone call with Zelensky. We don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think that phone call was likely about?
Well, I think it was a substantive phone call where we're basically making sure that President Zelensky knew that U.S. support, that NATO support was there. Probably, again, affirming that we're not going to put troops on the ground. We don't have a military treaty or relationship where we would put troops on the ground, although there is a new agreement that was put in place between Ukraine and Poland, which allows Poland to provide more resources to Ukraine than it was before. However, what I think we made clear, and certainly President Zelensky talked about this in Munich, was if you know they're coming, impose sanctions. And I think that's probably what the gist of that discussion was the discussion about sanctions, and you're already starting to see that take place. And that's what President Zelensky wants. He wants Putin to understand the gravity, the consequences of his actions, and he wants that to happen before Soviet tanks start crossing the Ukraine border.
Right.
And that's probably what that discussion was.
Which has been a plea from Zelensky from the beginning. He's been asking the United States to impose sanctions earlier rather than later. So quite possibly we could be seeing that soon, is what you're saying.
I think, well, we're already seeing it.
Yeah.
Now that, to tell you the truth, to say that we're going to, restrict trade or do something with the Donbass region, I don't know how many contracts are really even going with the Donbass region at this point, because it's been a conflict region for a long time. So that's, to me, that's more of a gesture. Maybe, I don't know how much substance is behind that, but it's something that we would have to do regardless with those, now they've certainly, as they've called themselves breakaway republics, and Russia has recognized them as independent states. It's something we have to do pretty much. But the other side of this is I think you're going to see more sanctions hit very quickly. I think this is going to roll out very fast. And what's interesting is you have members of Congress who have been saying this, not always kindly towards the administration, but they've been saying this for some time, that we need to get the sanctions regime going. And so you may see a coalescing of a lot of different politicians, if you will, political leaders in Washington, D.C. falling behind the sanctions regime. And I'm hoping that we'd see some bipartisanship in how we approach this.
All right, Hal Kempfer, any last thoughts on this as we move forward and things really seeming to pick up today specifically?
Just one thing. When Russia goes in, if this becomes a conflict, it's going to be gruesome on a way that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. There's going to be horrendous casualties. There will be things that we're going to constantly be going back and saying, we haven't seen this since World War II. I think we need to, all of us, be ready for what's coming, and we need to be ready for what commitment it's going to take to help Ukraine in terms of maintaining their independence and maintaining their viability as a sovereign state. This is horrible, and if we let Russia roll over and take Ukraine, not only does this put a threat right on NATO's borders, but it puts a huge threat because the same language that he used with Ukraine is the same language that historically they've used against the Baltic states, which are NATO countries. And when he goes into the Baltic states, if he tries to do this in Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, then we have Article 5 of NATO kicking in, and at that point, we're all at war with Russia. So there's a domino effect on this that is very much in the mind of the president, very much in the mind of the leaders of NATO, the European Union, and the United Nations. And so we do not want this to go that direction, and we're going to try everything we can to try and slow this down or stop it before it begins. But this is a very serious thing that has huge ramifications here at home. It's going to have huge ramifications. So that's just something I just want to make sure everybody understands this. This isn't some little war somewhere that doesn't matter. And sometimes you hear that language. This is a European state connected to other European states. Just because it's not a member of NATO or a member of the European Union doesn't mean it's not significant. Austria is not a member of NATO. Finland's not a member of NATO. Sweden's not a member of NATO. You know, there's a number of countries in Europe that are not members of NATO that are still very significant countries. And what happens there has huge ramifications across their borders. And this is one of those situations.
Absolutely, a precursor for the future here. So thank you so much, Hal Kempfer, for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Won't be the last time we hear from you. Quite possibly talk to you a little bit later tonight.
Okay, Daytona. Thank you.
Thank you.